Good morning everyone, and welcome to the webinar, How to Write a Killer Speech. One of the common questions I get asked is, I need to present at a conference, I need to present at a meeting, how do I write a speech? How do I prepare my speech? And people start scripting their openings, or they start scripting their stories or the 3 points, and they're just not quite sure what's the right way or the best way, the optimal way to prepare a presentation. Now, I'm talking about a presentation for yourself. I'm not talking about writing a speech for a minister of government, although a lot of these principles apply. So welcome on How to Write a Killer Speech. Peter Dew's my name. Most of you know me. A little bit of housekeeping, a couple of new people on the webinar. Ask questions as we go. Just type in the dialogue box, the Q&A box, and I'll answer those questions as we go, or I may park them and answer them later on. This is a 30-minute webinar. I like to keep them short and sharp, so I may move on quickly. You can ask me questions after the webinar. Just send me an email and say, Peter, you didn't cover this properly. Can you explain this further? Take notes, think, apply the content to your own circumstances. Think of a webinar, think of a presentation you've done previously. Have you done anything different in preparing that speech? Think of a speech or a presentation you've got coming up in the future. Is there anything that you will now do differently or incorporate to make the speech work? It's really important that you try and take something away. If you don't take anything away, then it's just been 30 minutes of me talking, no action from you. Let's get started. Where do you start when you write a presentation? Do you begin at the beginning, or do you begin at the middle, or do you begin at the end? My recommendation is that you start at the end of your presentation. What do I mean by starting at the end? What do you want to happen when you've completed your presentation? What do you want people to do? What changes do you want the audience to do or make? What key information do you want them to walk away with? How do you want them to be feeling? What knowledge do you want them to walk out with? As they leave the presentation and they're thinking back and they're reflecting, what do you want at the core front of your audience's mind? This is where you start the presentation. We generally speak, we generally present because we want something to happen. We present for a reason. Have clarity around what that reason is and what you want to happen after you've spoken. Otherwise, you may just speak and nothing happens at the end. So the place to begin your presentation is at the end. What outcomes, what changes in behavior, in attitude, in knowledge do you want them to take away with them? Now you can start moving on to your core message, the real purpose of your presentation. So what is your core message? And that core message is that unequivocal, without a doubt, that big take-home message that all of us take away. It's kind of the message that runs all the way through your presentation, without a doubt. And I say ask 2 questions. So in order to work out what your core message is, ask 2 questions. So the first question is, what do I want them to remember? And how I describe this is, if I was at your presentation and 2 months later I bump into you downtown, Hay Street Mall in Perth, Bourke Street Mall in Melbourne, and I come running up to you and I say, Alistair, Rachel, Stephen, Peter, Richard, I loved your presentation 2 months ago. I loved. What do you want me to remember? This is your takeaway message. What unequivocally, without a doubt, do you want me to remember after you've spoken? Some people give lots of little messages and hope the audience walks away with the right message. But if you give us too much information, we'll choose which one we take away with, and your core message may get lost. Some people call it the scattergun approach. So if I give enough messages, if I hit the wall with a lot of information, hopefully some of it will stick. Don't do scattergun approach. Have that clarity of what you want them to remember. So that's the first thing, the first question. This is in determining your core message. The second thing is to ask yourself is, why does it matter to the audience? In other words, what's in it for me? Not for you. If you're passionate about something, you think this is the way forward and it has no relevance to me or the people in your room, in your audience, then you've missed the mark. You need to create relevance. What's in it for me? Several ways of doing that. Do a pre-workshop questionnaire. Walk in your audience's footsteps. Understand their pain, understand their problems, understand their issues, and make sure your message solves that problem for them. So they're the two questions to ask yourself as you're working out your core message, your core purpose. What, without a doubt, do I want Peter to remember after I've spoken for 30 minutes? And why does that matter to Peter? Why does that matter to your audience? The mistakes that people do in writing a speech is that there's too much information and the core message is not clear. That is the scattergun approach. And the second mistake they do is they don't create the relevance for the people in the room. Now that you know what you want to happen, so you've started with the end in mind and you're clear on your core message, you can now move on to the next part of your writing a killer speech, writing a powerful speech. And that is start strong, open, your opening, your beginning. It's called the rule of primacy. The first 15 seconds of what you say in a formal presentation matter. The first words are important. So you need to grab attention. Are you going to open with an amazing statistic? Are you going to open with a quotation from a famous person? Are you going to open by being disruptive and putting forward a scenario that's going to shock people? Don't open with housekeeping. Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Dew. Can you turn your mobile phones off? The toilets are out the back. It's a real pleasure to be here today. Behavioral psychologists say the first 15 to 30 seconds matter. Make that strong, make that powerful, make that have impact. So how are you going to open the next time that you write a presentation or prepare for a presentation? Please don't start with the housekeeping. If you have an MC, a Masters of Ceremony, they can do your biography, the introduction, let people know where the toilets are. If you don't have an MC, you should start strong, and then later when you've got attention, you can step down, step back and do your housekeeping. First, words matter. The rule of primacy, they create memorable messages, those open sticky words. So now you've got your core message, you've got your beginning, and it's not good morning everyone, it's starting strong. Now you can start with your ending. You can work out how you're going to wrap up. And this is called the rule of recency. And behavioral psychologists say that apparently you're going to remember those last 30 seconds I say. So that'll be at 9:29 a.m. West Australian time. Whatever I say, apparently you're going to remember. So if I say, thanks everyone for participating in the webinar. I've really enjoyed my time with you. Please have a good day. That is polite platitudes, but it doesn't have any power. It doesn't give you something to take away. So this is where you need to have your memorable ending. And it could be a call to action. Leave them with a challenge. Ask them to do something. The most recent words are very relevant, very important. So I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to ask you some questions. How might you start your next presentation? And how might you end your next presentation? What are some ideas that you can use to start strong and to end strong? Yep, just write in your ideas. Questions? I have a question. What do I do about acknowledging traditional landowners? Should that not come first? It's a little bit of a tricky one. I still prefer, and I work a lot with Aboriginal health workers, and I also have Aboriginal people in my mixed workshops, and I've asked them that question, and they understand the rule of primacy and how the first words can have impact. And I start strong, then I step down and say, before I go on, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners, the Noongar people of West Australia, and I respect past and present custodians of this land. I'm in Bendigo in a couple of weeks' time, so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional landowners, the Dja Dja Wurrung people, and I acknowledge past and present custodians. The Aboriginal people have said they don't mind that 30-second opening and then that step back and that sincere and strong acknowledgement of the Aboriginal people. Quotes, what sort of quotes someone's asked? It's generally amazing quotes or statistics that grab people by surprise. I was in a seminar, I was training someone last year and their opening response was, every 5 days, the first words that they said, every 5 days in Australia, a woman loses their life to the hands of their partner. Every 5 days, a woman loses their life to the hands of a partner, mostly male partners, but not always. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cheryl, and I want to talk to you about domestic violence and how we need to step up and take ownership. So she had my attention, and that statistic, that fact, that shameful reality of Australian society is with me forever. So that's an example of a quote. It doesn't always have to be shocking. Sorry, that's an example of a statistic. A quote, when I work with fear of public speaking, and one of my propositions, one of my key learnings is the fear may never go away. And so I use a quote from Mark Twain, the great American author. Mark Twain said there's 2 kinds of speakers in this world, those that are nervous and those that are liars. Then I go on to deconstruct that. In other words, what Mark Twain is saying, everyone has nerves or fear around public speaking, so don't worry about it. Then I welcome everyone to the Overcome Your Fear of Public Speaking workshop, and I move on. Thank you for those questions and those comments. Now we can move to the body of your presentation. I like to use 3 to 4 points, but there is another rule. It's called the rule of 3. 3 points just seem to work for me, and 4 points is okay. If you have 5 or 6 points, what I would do is I would subdivide the points. And if this is point 1 and this is point 2 and this is point 3, bearing in mind these 3 points lead us to your core message, so they need to demonstrate, to amplify, to add rigor to what your core message is and the takeaway. If you've got 5 points, I'm going to go 1A, 1B, 2A, and 2B, and 3. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, but I'll try and aggregate subpoints into point 1 and then make that still the big point. It's called the rule of 3, and the rule of 3 is in not only in the spoken word, it's also in literature, and there is some, I guess, some behavioral psychology behind it as well. So the rule of 3, it's rhythmical, it's memorable, and it just works. And the behavioral psychology is that human mind can absorb 5 chunks of information at a time, plus or minus 2. So 3 becomes the lowest common denominator. Use 3 bits of information. You probably know that Goldilocks had trouble with 3 bears. There were 3 little pigs and their houses when the wolf chased them. 3 blind mice in our nursery rhymes, 3 wise men in the Bible, 3 stooges in the black and white movie days. In a court of law, you've got to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. 3s are in our written language and should be in our spoken language. So 3 points that lead us to your core message. Then support your 3 points with stories. So once again, if you have point 1, you can have 2 or 3 stories that support or illustrate that point 1. And you can collect stories. And the stories will help you target your content to the right people. So stories are not just bedtime stories. Please don't tell bedtime stories. Stories are your case studies, your examples, your anecdotes, your experiences, your quotations, your metaphors, your lived journeys. And as I said, collect them and build a library. You can have positive stories and you can have negative stories. You don't have to always win or be the hero or have success. There are powerful lessons in our mistakes or the experiences where we don't get the outcome we expected. And it's not that we failed, it's what is the lesson, what's the learning, what's the takeaway from that negative experience. And then, as you collect your stories, you can then target your stories by using the right language or framing them, picking a different aspects of the story and highlighting a particular point that works for a different audience. You have industry appropriate examples, and I work in the health sector a fair bit. I mentioned Aboriginal health workers, and I have 30-year history in hospitals as a medical microbiologist working in pathology labs. So I've got stories and examples. They don't have to come from the pathology lab. They can come from my other life. But if there's a message there, I can still use it to illustrate my point. I also do a lot of work for the mining and oil and gas sector, BHP, Rio Tinto and Chevron. I don't use my health stories as much as I do for health workers. I need to pick other stories. I also work for the disability sector. Disability stories don't necessarily work for the mining and oil and gas. So it's using the right anecdotes, the right data, the right story that demonstrates that you really know your audience and you know the values of that organization. One example I use is a metaphor, and I talk about the human heart. And the human heart pumps 350 million litres of blood in a lifetime. That equates to turning your kitchen tap on full bore for 45 years. People that work in the water industry, Water Corporation in West Australia, remember that metaphor. Tell me not to use it because water's scarce, but 350 million litres, 45 years of a tap running full bore. Mining, oil and gas, 350 million litres will fill 3 of the world's biggest super tankers full of oil. So in trying to demonstrate how if you have data, number, statistics, you need to make it concrete, that number of 350 million litres is fairly obscure. It's true. Some people remember turn on your tap for 45 years. Some people remember 3 super tankers full of oil. I use the different metaphor for the different audiences. So that's how you can target your stories. I'm just going to go back a slide. Your bank of stories or your library of stories, you'll give them a name, but you'll also give them maybe an industry or an audience that they're best suited for. So let's put it all together, a safe and simple structure. I'm now working in the construction industry, a safe and simple structure. So this is putting it all together. It's a bit of a mind map, and it goes like this. So start with the outcome that you want to happen. So as people walk out, what do you want them to do? What behavior do you want them to change? What knowledge do you want them to have? This is where you start your presentation. You start at the end. Then have clarity of your core message. Ask those 2 questions. What do I want them to remember? Don't do scattergun, lots of things. And why is it relevant to that audience? What's in it for me? Now you've got your core message through those 2 questions that's going to lead us to the outcome you want. Start strong. This is your opening. This is your beginning. Rule of primacy. Start strong, 30-second quotation, statistic, shock people, be disruptive, the way Uber is disrupting the taxi industry. Put forward a proposal that is so bizarre that people maybe even get angry, and then step back, deconstruct it. You've got people's attention, they'll remember you. End strong. What's your take-home message? What's your call to action? 3 or 4 points. Remember I told you the rule of 3? Really important. And then build your stories and your anecdotes. So as you build your stories, you can flavor the stories to meet different audiences. So the different color is a different audience. So these are the bank of stories that I collect for the mining sector. These are the bank of stories I collect for the health sector. These are the bank of stories that I collect for the finance and the superannuation sector when I present to them. And one of those stories is my father dying without a will, dying intestate, and my responsibility, along with my mother as an executor, to deal with all the things and the issues that occurred and the struggle that took because there was no will. And that's your mind map of a presentation. Really simple. The beauty of this, and one of the webinars that I do is how to present without notes. One of the strategies is have this mind map. So I'm asking you to learn a 30-second opening, script it, learn it, statistic, quote. Mark Twain said there's 2 kinds of speakers, those that are nervous, those that are liars. Script and learn your 30-second take-home message. You're clear on your purpose. You've got to remember 3 points, that's all. And give your stories a name. So this is my father. I can tell you about my father, the struggle with the will, me being the executor, and why everyone should have a will. If I'm talking to financial planners, they know that. That's one of their stories. I can tell that story for 5 to 10 minutes. I don't need any notes. I spoke about the metaphor of the human heart. I can use that for about 3 minutes. And the purpose of that story around the heart is when you're using data or statistics, you need to make it memorable and concrete. When I talk about fear, I use the story of Ringo Starr, one of the Beatles, so I'm just going to call him Ringo. Excuse my scribble, it's a bit hard with a mouse. Ringo Starr. Ringo vomits quite often before he performs in a musical concert, even with the Beatles. So his nickname was Pukey in the Sky with Diamonds. So nerves may never go away. If I put that Ringo Starr story with the Mark Twain quote, I've got 2 evidences or 2 metaphors or 2 stories that I use to support my point. You know, in being an effective public speaker, it's about learning to deal with your fear, not getting rid of your fear. So that is the mind map. That's how it works. Are there any questions on that? And I'm just moving to the summary. So where do you start? Start at the end. And a couple of you started a little bit late on the webinar, so this will help you. Start with the end in mind. What do you want people to do when they leave your presentation? This should help you structure your core message. Ask 2 questions. What do I want them to remember? Why does it matter to the audience? What's in it for me? You may think it's very important and the best thing since sliced bread, but if I don't care or it's of no value to me or you don't solve a problem for me, then you've missed your mark. 30-second opening, 30-second close. Rule of primacy, first words. Rule of recency, the stuff I'm wrapping up with now. 3 to 4 key points. Love 3. Use your stories and use that mind map, that safe and simple structure. Any last comments? Any questions? While you're writing those in, those last questions, upcoming webinars next week. We've spoken about ending your presentation. I'm going to expand and drill down further on 6 ways to effectively nail your ending. Remember, it's the rule of recency. It's what people remember. So this webinar will help you put some rigor around that. And some little known public speaking statistics that I need to know, and that I is for you, that you need to know. And this is the 2 next webinars that I'm running. One more in April and the first one in May. There'll be a second one later on in May. You know how to check for my webinars. Just go to my website. Upcoming workshops, busy road trip in Victoria, starting in Mildura, Swan Hill, Shepparton, and ending up in Melbourne. Presentations in Perth. So please share this with any of your colleagues or people you think might benefit from my workshops. As I said, any further questions, send me an email after this webinar concludes. I do a recording, so if you did start late and you would like a copy of the webinar, send me an email. And on my website, I have a workbook and an audio book together for the same price that takes you through this short half-hour webinar more detailed, and you can use this resource over and over again every time you want to write a speech. So last questions, ending, but traditionally people say thank you and goodbye. I understand that. I'm not saying throw that out. So thank you for your participation in the webinar. It's been a real pleasure to present to you. Do have a safe journey home. I know some of you traveled a long way. Now I'm going to go into that call to action. Remember, it's not what you learnt today on the webinar. What are you going to do differently tomorrow for your next presentation? Is it around your beginning? Is it around your ending? Or are you going to start collecting stories? Make sure you do something differently to make your next speech, your next presentation more effective. That's what I mean by end strongly. I'm not meaning throw away your polite of thanking people, recognizing people, and even questions. Notice I've taken questions during, and now I'm closing questions, and I'm going to end by saying, do something different. What are you going to take away from today's webinar? You know how to reach me. Follow me on Facebook, connect with me on LinkedIn,